In this video, we're going to look at the composition or constituents of blood. It's the only fluid connective tissue in the body. It's specialized connective fluid because it can circulate throughout the body and it's in liquid form. The matrix of this connective tissue is plasma, and the plasma is the liquid part of blood that's not living. But the living portion of blood are the formed elements, and those are cells which do not dissolve in the plasma but remain suspended. And here are our three formed elements or cells, living things in blood. Erythrocytes, those are red blood cells, RBCs. Erythro is the prefix or combining form, I should say, meaning red. Cytes is cells. Leukocytes, leuko is white. So leukocytes are white blood cells, WBCs, and then we have platelets, which are cell fragments with clotting functions. We're going to need to go through all three of these types of formed elements, but let's look real quickly at the two main components of blood. That's the plasma and the formed elements, very generally. So this is a good figure from your textbook to explain the two major components and subcomponents from blood. You can see here that blood has been withdrawn from a person, placed in a tube, centrifuged at very high speed, so now the components of blood will separate according to mass. And you can see that more than half of your blood content is blood plasma, which we'll see on the next slide is mainly water, but a lot of proteins in there as well. 55% is plasma, the liquid portion of blood. The living portion, the formed elements, make up about 45% or so of your blood. And the vast majority of your formed elements that we can see here is erythrocytes. And only a small little section, which they call a buffy coat because it appears clear between the two layers, are your white blood cells, leukocytes, and platelets. So less than 1% of your whole blood would be leukocytes and platelets. Something to remember here is plasma is the largest component by volume. It's more than half. But as far as concentration goes, there's a lot more stuff in here, much more concentrated. So erythrocytes, the red blood cells, have the highest concentration of material, even though the plasma occupies the most volume. And we can see that a hematocrit, which is the percent of blood volume that is red blood cells, is around in the mid-40s, depending on the person, percentage-wise, of the blood. Here we just have it generally at 45%. So blood plasma, or the liquid portion of blood, you can see here, is mostly water, 90% water. But what's the other 10%? Well, some of it is dissolved solutes, which we've seen in the past from A&P1, nutrients, gases, hormones from Chapter 16, waste products that get eliminated. A lot of this 10% remaining of blood plasma will be proteins. Plasma proteins are important because, which you can read right here, they contribute to osmotic pressure. Water follows solute, right? So the more proteins in blood is what helps draw water into the blood, which helps make up this 90%. So albumin is the most abundant protein. 60% of all your plasma proteins, and there's a lot of them, is albumin, which works for osmotic pressure. On the upcoming videos, we're going to look at the formed elements a little more closely, but let's end this video with just a general statement on formed elements. The cells, the living part of blood. It consists of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, or we can say erythrocytes, leukocytes, and thrombocytes. We're going to look at all of these in more detail, but just generally, of these three formed elements, only one type is actually a true cell, and that would be the white blood cells, because they have nuclei, they have organelles. But we can see Red blood cells, or erythrocytes, do not have a nucleus, do not have organelles, and platelets are just fragments of cells. So only the leukocytes, the white blood cells, are complete cells. They only survive a few days, sometimes up to 100 or 120 days if we're talking about erythrocytes in the blood. And most of our blood cells originate from our bone marrow, from stem cells in our bone marrow. And they don't divide once they get to their mature stage.